Florida is known around the world as a dream vacation destination. Warm weather, beautiful beaches, and attractions like Walt Disney World make it one of the most recognizable states in America. But Florida is more than a place to visit. It also has a long and fascinating history, shaped by geology, migration, empire, slavery, war, tourism, and technology. For much of its geologic history, the land that is now Florida lay underwater. Over time, layers of sedimentary rock formed beneath that ancient sea, creating natural resources such as potash and phosphorite, both used in fertilizer and other chemicals. Around 5 million years ago, the sea receded, leaving behind broad grasslands rich with plant and animal life. Florida later became a remarkable place for fossils, including those of Ice Age mammals such as saber-toothed cats, mastodons, giant sloths, and short-faced bears. The first human inhabitants of Florida were descendants of the people who crossed the Bering Land Bridge between roughly 20,000 and 15,000 years ago. Over many generations, different groups spread across the Americas, and some settled in Florida at least 12,000 years ago. These early peoples lived as hunter-gatherers alongside the last of the great Ice Age animals. As agriculture developed, native societies in Florida adapted to their environments in different ways. In the far south, the Calusa relied mainly on fishing, hunting, and gathering rather than farming. Farther north, groups such as the Timucua and Apalachee practiced agriculture, growing crops including maize or corn. They also maintained trade networks with other peoples on the peninsula and beyond. At the time of first European contact, Florida may have had somewhere between 350,000 and 700,000 inhabitants, though exact numbers are impossible to know. The first Europeans to reach and attempt to colonize the peninsula were the Spanish. In 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon arrived and gave the region its European name, La Florida, likely in honor of the Easter season, Pascua Florida. Legends later linked his voyage to the search for the Fountain of Youth, but that story is more myth than fact. Early Spanish efforts to settle the area failed. Native resistance, storms, and harsh conditions made colonization difficult. A permanent Spanish foothold came only in 1565 with the founding of St. Augustine, the oldest continuously occupied European established city in what would become the United States. From there, the Spanish defended their claims against rivals such as the French and the English. Like elsewhere in their empire, they built missions and tried to convert native peoples to Roman Catholicism. At the same time, they brought devastating diseases such as measles and smallpox. These epidemics killed huge numbers of indigenous people who had no immunity to them. The Spanish also introduced the horse to North America, and over time, horses spread across the continent, transforming many indigenous societies far beyond Florida. By the early 1700s, however, Spanish control was weakening. The British colonies were expanding southward, and the founding of Georgia in 1733 created a direct border between Britain and Spanish Florida. Spain also used Florida to undermine the British plantation system by offering freedom to enslaved people who escaped south, as long as they converted to Catholicism. Hundreds gained freedom this way. Then the great imperial wars of Europe spilled into North America. In the 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War, Britain defeated France and its allies. In 1763, Florida passed from Spain to Britain, but British rule did not last long. At the end of the American Revolution, Spain regained the peninsula. Even so, the young United States increasingly viewed Florida as territory it should control. American settlers pushed across the border, and U.S. forces entered the region in campaigns against indigenous groups. These conflicts, including the First Seminole War, convinced Spain that Florida was costing more than it was worth. In 1821, Spain ceded Florida to the United States. That transfer brought enormous changes. One of the most important involved the people who had escaped slavery by fleeing into Spanish Florida. Under Spain, many had found protection, and some had become closely connected with the Seminoles, a people formed over time from various displaced native groups and others seeking refuge. Under U.S. rule, those protections disappeared. At the same time, the U.S. Army intensified its policy of Indian removal. In a series of Seminole wars, many native people were killed, forced west into Indian territory, or pushed into harsh reservation lands. Some resisted for years by hiding in the Everglades, but most were eventually removed or destroyed. By 1845, Florida had enough people to become the 27th state. Like much of the South, its economy depended heavily on slavery. In 1850, nearly half the state's population was enslaved. So, when Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, Florida joined the wave of secession. On January 10, 1861, it became the third state to leave the Union and join the Confederacy. During the Civil War, Florida was not a major battlefield compared with Virginia or Tennessee, but it still mattered to the Confederate war effort. It supplied men, food, and goods, and its long coastline helped smugglers run through the Union blockade. After the war, Florida entered Reconstruction, the era in which the former Confederate states were required to abolish the old slave system and reorganize their governments under new constitutional rules. Florida's Reconstruction period ended in 1876. Like much of the South, it was followed by the rise of Jim Crow, which stripped many African Americans of rights they had only recently gained. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Florida experienced major economic growth. Railroads made it possible to ship oranges, grapefruits, and other fresh produce across the country before they spoiled. Those same rail lines also brought tourists, helping lay the foundations of Florida's modern tourism industry. The state suffered serious hardship in the 1920s and during the Great Depression, worsened by local bank failures and the devastating 1926 hurricane. But New Deal programs and later World War II brought investment and construction. Because of its warm climate, Florida became a major training ground for troops. Roads, rail connections, and airports expanded rapidly. In the decades that followed, Florida was transformed again. The Civil Rights era challenged segregation and voter suppression, leading to major legal changes, especially after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. During the Cold War, Florida's location made it strategically important. Its closeness to Cuba gave it a central role after Fidel Castro's revolution and during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Florida also became one of the great gateways to space. Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral served as launch sites for the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, including the missions that sent human beings to the moon. In recent decades, Florida has remained a key center not only for NASA, but also for private space launches. The state also played an outsized role in modern American politics. In the 2000 presidential election, disputes over ballot design and vote counting in Florida led to the Supreme Court case Bush versus Gore, which effectively decided the election in favor of George W. Bush. Still, for many people around the world, Florida is most associated with tourism, and no name represents that better than Walt Disney World. Since opening in 1971, it has drawn millions of visitors to Orlando and helped define the modern theme park experience. Disney is not only the largest employer in Florida, but one of the largest single-site employers in the United States. As of the 2020 census, Florida was the third most populous state in the country. From ancient seas and ice age animals to native civilizations, Spanish colonies, orange groves, rockets, and theme parks, Florida's story is far richer than its postcard image suggests. It is a place where geography, history, and reinvention have all combined to shape one of the most influential states in America.